Hello everyone. The broadcast is about to start, so if you just give us a couple of minutes and just settle down and get ready, and we'll start in about 30 seconds. Okay, I want to start off by saying welcome to everybody. I'm doing this broadcast from a client site in London, so I hope you can hear me okay. This is just a 30-minute presentation on the adaptiveness of lean and how we use that to help smarten up our workforce, our management, and our business intelligence so that we can get a competitive edge, we can get operational effectiveness, but more importantly, we get very high levels of employee and customer engagement. So let's just get into this. My contact details are on the front, as you can see. Understand that a little bit of a problem to move forward. In the presentation, there's a little bit of blurb on myself and the company. You will get access to the slides later. So the program for today is, as I said, it's about smartening up. I'm going to make a business case for adaptive lean in the workforce. I'm going to start off with a call to action in a moment. The presentation is going to look at the customer problem, what problem we're trying to solve. That's the Sensei's favorite question is what problem we're trying to solve. So I'm going to explain that right up from the start. Then I'm going to go into how we get connected to the customers and learning to see the customer's world. And there are two techniques I want to illustrate in this very short presentation. Something I call T value streams, which is slightly different to your normal value stream because we're talking about services. I know I'll explain why they're different. And then talk about customer journey planning and how they work together and how they give us a different insight on how we should be designing, building, and operating our businesses. I'll then slip into a logistics example, a company, a sort of FedEx type company. And then I'll talk about how we can use some of these insights to gain a competitive position. And then I want to give an IT example of using T value streams and customer journey planning. And at the end, there will be references and sources. So the call to action. Let me just get that out of the way. The call to action here is quite simple. This broadcast obviously is only 30 minutes or so, and I'm going to be picking two industries to illustrate the principles at work. I'm quite prepared if you can get within your company maybe 10 or more managers. I can present this presentation to you with industry specific to your line of business, and we can set that up in the future. So if you want this presentation done for you and your colleagues, just respond to the call of action email, which will come out at the end. Okay, end of that, let's get into what we're talking about. So what business and customer or user problems are we trying to solve using adaptive lean, and especially using it in IT? So I'm going to use two examples later. I'm going to go through something that a lot of people haven't realized is that the lean principles have been updated. They've been updated by Womack and Jones in 2006. And I like to think my book, Sense Respond, which was published in 2005, had some influence on that. Certainly some references from my book appeared in the Lean Solutions book. Why is this different? Because Lean Solutions was looking at how we take lean out of manufacturing and into service industries, and we were looking at how lean affects the world of the customer. And in services, that's the real area we need to focus on. So I'm going to use some of their principles, and I'll show you how we link these new service principles to some of the old lean principles to create the T-value streams in a moment. So let's get back to what Womack and Jones are saying. From a customer's perspective, it doesn't matter what the service is. They're trying to engage with an organization, and they'd like to have that one point of contact. And they want not just that one point of contact, but they want you to solve the problem completely and not just come back time and time again. Straightforward. Customers don't want you to waste their time or cause you hassle. I'm sure as I'm going through this list, you can all remember times when trying to contact customers, trying to contact businesses and trying to get services, how much of a headache it can be. We need to minimize the cost of doing business with you, says the customer, because sometimes you're using my time and sometimes I've got to pay for the privilege. The other thing I would like you to do, if you're working for me and I'm your customer, I would like you to provide exactly what I need and deliver value where and when I need it in the form that I like. I'd like you to reduce the number of decisions I must make to resolve my problems. What Womack and Jones are saying is you can have too much choice. In IT, for instance, giving a user of IT lots and lots of different options and configurations can be quite confusing. And at the end of the day, the customer is coming to you because you're the expert and we need to provide that advice instead of giving them all the options. This last one is, don't get me to help you, I want you to help me. Now, this is not from Womack and Jones, I've added this. And this was in response to the plethora of self-help that's out on the internet that lots of organizations put out. And what I found is a lot of the self-help doesn't help. In fact, the only people it helps are the organization, because a lot of things that the customer is calling up about are for things that shouldn't have gone wrong in the first place. And the business is telling the customer how to fix these things for themselves. And in the world of lean, we are now using and wasting the customer's time. And it is a bit audacious to start thinking that we can use unpaid customers' times to fix our own problems. So, for all service organizations, whether they are serving an internal user within an organization or whether they're serving external customers or consumers, what would your service organization do if you had to pay for all the service user time that you wasted? It's now on your budget. Now, if you're in IT or the user's time, it's now on your budget. Add it to your cost of IT. Add it to the cost of your call center. I'm sure if that cost in wasted time from a customer's perspective was on your budget, you'd want to find out what's causing it and stop it. And the whole premise of this talk going forward is we are going to do exactly that. Let's pretend that really is our money, because at the end of the day, it's our customers' time and their money. So, how do we start by moving towards an adaptive lean thinking? I said earlier on I'll be introducing two concepts to you. One is the customer journey planning and T-value streams. So let me unfold this. What we have in a service organization is the delivery process. We have this in manufacturing as well, but we also have in services the consumption process. And that consumption process is outside of the organization. And when we look at the lean principles as originally outlined in lean thinking by Womack and Jones many years ago, they were looking very much at an internal perspective in trying to organize the internal assets to be able to create value for the customer. So they said specify value from the customer's point of view. Then we look internally, identify all the steps in the value stream, eliminate the steps that don't create any value, then integrate it, and then set up a system where the customer can pull services as and when they want it. And then we go back and we pursue perfection by going round and round this. But this was really coming from an internal perspective. What Womack and Jones were doing in the Lean Solutions book, we're looking, well, actually there's a different perspective. There's a perspective of the customer on how I pull and consume and put those services to use. And that's where these principles I mentioned earlier on come into play. Here they are. So there are two processes. Now in lean and lean service, we need to do both. We need to optimize internally, but there is a business process that is outside the organization. And that is the one that we need to optimize. And that is the one that gives us great insight into the customer's world. It actually gives us a lot of information about the types of services that we should be providing. And it actually calls into question the types of service levels, the traditional ones, that we put in place. So let me give you an example. I'm going to start off very simply here. This is not an IT example. It's a typical service desk in a logistics and documents company. What we did, we sat down with people from all over the business, couriers, account teams, service desk staff, managers, and then we just asked a set of questions. We said, okay, before we go out and understand what's happening in the customer's world and map the customer's world, and let's see how we respond to it, what do we say about ourselves? And we ask these questions, we provide secure deliverables. And everybody's saying, yes, we do really well. Are we reliable? Yes, we score 10 out of 10 for that. Our solutions are very flexible. Yep, 9 out of 10. We respond quickly. 10 out of 10. And you can see the list goes on. If you look right down the bottom here, we cooperate between departments. Yep, very good collaboration and cooperation. Then we mapped the customer's world. What they were doing, the process they had to go through to even decide to even use this company. How would they make up their mind? How do they compare prices? How do they then engage? Having gone through that and then measured the business's real response to the real customer needs, they came back out after doing the field work and we asked the same questions. We had a completely different perspective. If you look at we cooperate between departments, next to nothing. What they'd done is they confused getting on with other departments with collaboration and working on behalf of the customers. They found they weren't doing that. Look at we respond quickly. They found that they didn't, yet they were meeting all their internal SLAs. We provided secure deliverables. Well, having gone out there, seeing how it actually works, that was not true. Now, if you want to transform this organization and its thinking, you will not transform the organization if they thought the way they did before, because they'll say, hey, we're all doing well. Why do we need to change? But after the mapping of the customer journey and the business end-to-end response to that, a very different picture emerged, and this led to taking much more affirmative action on the whole business. This is the map they put together. What I've done here, I put the T value stream on its side because it was much easier to get on the wall that way. What we had was, this was the company strategy, the logistics company. What we had here was the customer life cycle, which they'd mapped outside. Then they had the different client and customer strategies, what they were trying to do. And then they mapped how the whole end-to-end business, and this was mapping it globally, responded to each of those stages in that customer life cycle. And they got some really important data that said, actually, we weren't doing very well. Some of the information that they came up with were things like even invoicing. There were major steps. 8 people involved when only 1 needed to be. We had 10 systems that had to put information from one to the other, very often manually. And the time to process invoices was anything from 1 day to 120 days. Again, all these steps from waste, it was not collaboration, yet they were meeting their local targets. So let's look at this customer journey lifecycle. It's very simple. It's deceptively simple. What we have at the top is this is the customer lifecycle. We then ask the question, well, what does the customer require from us at each of these phases? What do frontline staff need to supply? What knowledge, information, and skills are needed for each of those? And then what is missing below that? What skills, what services, what opportunities are there to exploit, and what capabilities do we need to develop. The interesting thing is when they plotted this customer life cycle for the very first time, 3 or 4 stages they had never identified before, and they'd identified a number of situations where they could deliver higher levels of services and new forms of revenue. So we formalized that. These are the activities along that customer life cycle. And these were the teams on the left-hand side. This is the team that went out, did the investigation. You can see the boards behind them. They were feeding to their colleagues, and they were all astonished when they were presented with the data that they knew very little about their customers. They knew very little about how to cooperate, yet everybody got on. What do they do with that information? Well, basically, here's that T-value stream shown on the right-hand side of the page. We translated that into a business design, looking at what service types were coming in for those different segments of the journeys. What channels were we going to offer for different types of services? Because different types of services lend themselves to different forms of transaction. Some of it needs to be face-to-face, and some of it can be over the internet. Then we organized the teams. The structure was aligned by industry type, whereas before they were arranged into high-value customers, mid-value customers, and low. And they are giving different levels of service. By organizing this way, we gave everybody a high level of service. They were also measuring the global response. This was in Greece. They were measuring the local customers and how the local transportation worked and the global transportation worked for those customers. They were measuring that. Then they created local and global solutions. They also created new services and products because they'd identified things the customers needed but weren't being provided by anybody before. And this created an industry differentiation for them. So let's take a look at how we apply this to IT. Let's take this first picture. It's slightly more complicated in IT because very often in IT you are supporting the employees of a large organization, internal users, and those internal users are very often interfacing with real-world customers. I think the closest IT companies get to seeing the real customer is through the internet. So what we have within IT is we have to use our IT to enable the internal service user, but they are there to enable the external business, the customer's world. So what we're trying to do with customer journey planning here is understanding not service levels in how many did we fix in a certain amount of time, what is the uptime. That's traditional. What we are looking at here is if the IT was performing well to specification, did it create outcomes, the right outcomes for the users, that's internal, and did it create the right outcomes for the customers themselves? And we are now moving from internal SLAs to external business outcomes. And that creates a very different mindset. It also requires a different capability within our staff. No longer is it safe to sit in your IT job and think, I'll just do my busy bang IT stuff. I need to start understanding what's happening in the customer world. It's absolutely crucial. Why? Because we are now contracting not around IT. We are contracting around how IT performs in the real world. And a lot of organizations are now doing this and are leading the field in precisely that. So how does that work? Well, let's just take a closer look at an IT business. An IT business usually has a front office, typically help desk. It might have development people for applications development, and then having done that, you then pass that to the infrastructure guys to make sure the infrastructure is up and running and secure. So how do we map the customer journey? we don't look at the IT. We take IT people and business people, the users, and we map the real world customer journey together. We identify who they are. Then we identify all the users, whether they're in product development, marketing, sales. And then what we do is we look at what is the demand that comes in from each of those internal customers and how does that satisfy the external customer. Then we need to say, well, how does the infrastructure support the internal user and the external customer? And then we are now starting to align all our IT strategy to user outcomes and customer outcomes. Gone are the days of just measuring the availability of the network. That is a given. That I'm not saying get rid of those measures. They are important, but they are insufficient in being adaptive and delivering true value to the customer and the user. Unless there's a clear line of sight between what you're doing in IT and customer value, you have no idea if you are producing value. Then, of course, we have to look at the infrastructure itself. We are looking at the utility outcomes. These are things like online services. Of course, we need those, but those online services have to provide customer outcomes too. So that works in a situation if you are an internal IT organization supporting your users and you're going out to your set of customers. I'm going to propose there's another way that you can use this, which I have found with a number of clients to be very, very insightful. And this is a situation where we take it up a level. We take it up to the business. Instead of saying, well, it's just my business I'm looking at the real customer journey on, say, travel. Let's take the travel industry. If I wanted to go and travel, I need to decide where I'm going, etc., etc. I would use travel agents, maybe different booking. I would map that whole cycle. Then what we would do is look at the different businesses that support that whole value stream. And that's the customer's world. Some of those will be your own business, as is shown here. Some of those parts of that value stream, the customer's value stream, is being run by some of your partners, some by your competitors. But what you'll often find is there's part of that customer's value stream where nobody is looking after them. So from an IT perspective, you may be looking after your partners by supplying them with IT, your own business, but there's a wealth of other opportunities we can supply and take our IT to support. Because what we are doing here is we are using IT to go across the customer's value stream. Yes, we need to optimize our internal production process. That goes without saying, but that is early lean. The real world of lean and the real competitive advantage is to optimize the value stream in which the customer lives and breathes. This is a survey from a large telecommunications organization we worked with a number of years ago, where we did exactly this. Now, when we are talking about a large telco and their customers were other businesses. And what we had to find out is what were those businesses really trying to do. We had SLAs and we were making them by and large, but we really didn't understand, even though we were providing the services, what were they doing with them. So we went through this mapping of our client's client and their customers, looking through the client out into the real world and mapping back. And this is a survey run by some researchers at Cambridge University, and we can see a before and after. Even staff understanding the services and how they work in the customer's world help them make better decisions. Understanding the customer improves their commitment to their work. You can see the before and after. You can see it as helping them make better decisions. They weren't making local decisions that impacted other people downstream inadvertently. It also became the job of people that were doing the day-to-day job to do that investigation. This wasn't a separate analytical group doing big data, and big data is only as good as the context you've got. These guys knew the context. They were living and breathing it now. And they were making better decisions. Their engagement with the customer was sky high. Their understanding of the customer was sky high. They're then bringing that information in to share with managers. And you can see, I help my organization understand what customers value. Before, it wasn't even their job. Now it was. The management team is then committed to improving the quality of work based on this data. Involvement in decision-making about what new services and how we improve services went sky high. They now make decisions with the customer in mind. And then I can use customer data to help managers and other people to make better decisions. And we were working in a much more collaborative way, quite naturally, because we'd moved to outcome measures in the customer world, not internal siloed measures. And the only way you can achieve outcome measures in the customer's world is if you collaborate. So there's a big shift in what we measure. So this telco, this was just the first year's savings. It started off saying, the CEO of this organization, look, our operating models have become irrelevant. We've been concentrating on the technology instead of what does the technology do in the real world, and are we providing them with what they need? And that meant all the technology people needed to understand the customer's world. This is smarting up, not dumbing down. We can see the operational savings absolutely improved. Just look at some of the improved customer experience cycle time. This is the end-to-end time. The reduced handoffs internally, because it was highly siloed before. We upskilled the job because we took an awful lot of work out. If you look at reduced routine updates by 67%, reduced escalations by 83%, work in progress and associated overheads reduced. That then gave the space to do the higher level work, which these people have been capable of all along. But because there was so much waste in the system and we were just processing stuff and hitting internal numbers, half the time we didn't realize what we were working on was in fact waste. Comes back to that saying, unless we see a clear line of sight between every piece of work we do and customer value in their world, we have no idea whether we're creating waste or value. So that's a very short introduction. The message I really want to take here is Lean has moved on. There are different principles. Please read the Sense Respond book, that would be great. But read Lean Solutions and look at what Womack and Jones are saying. Those Lean principles have been updated with the consumption principles in the real world. That is where value is created. And that is where the opportunities are. And with an organization and a workforce who's highly tuned to that, you're always creating innovative new services and ways forward. You're always going to be ahead of the competition. Why? Because you're engaged with the customer and the customer will pull you away from the competition. So that's the end of this very short introduction. I'm sure there's a lot more we can talk about. I'm just going to open this up to a couple of questions. So I'm just going to review some questions. Okay, I got one question here, and this question quite simply says, this sounds great, however, how do you get senior managers to look outside the organization, especially when the KPIs and the revenues look okay? So really good question. It comes down to a situation when I think it's very dangerous when you are very successful because you can get complacent. What this type of thinking does, it forces you to take a good, hard, long look at your customer environment. What else can you be doing? Because if you're not looking at it, somebody else could be, and you can be blindsided. I remember talking to a teleconferencing firm once when we did this work, And we found that about 70% of the work that was coming in and they were responding to was actually because the product didn't work that well. However, they did provide excellent levels of customer service on fixing problems. They even won awards, and they were #1 in the industry for customer service. But when we pointed out that actually they were #1 at fixing problems that they had caused the customer, and it wasn't really a badge of honor. And if they didn't fix their products and services and internal processes, somebody else would beat them to the marketplace. And sure enough, 6 months later, they were beaten to the marketplace. So even with the data, even with a compelling case, sometimes complacency is just too deep-rooted. Complacency can say it'll never happen, but 6 months later, the CEO of that organization was fired. Okay, any other questions? Okay, I have a question here. This relates to the methods for the actual mapping process. If I go back to this slide, will do. The real world customer journey, it's we do have a set of methods for that, but I know a number of people will probably have their own version of that. We've developed our method from a number of years because we know what we are looking at specifically, but the way that we do that is quite simply take a number of people from the organization and actually go out into that world. If you think about, there's a phrase in Lean we call going to Gemba. Usually what we mean by that is going to the shop floor within our business. But in services, the real Gemba is in the customer's world. And that's where we all need to go. And regularly going out there is really important. You pick up trends much earlier. You see things much quicker. So getting out there and having those structured conversations with various people from your organization not only builds relationship with your clients and potential clients, they also see that you are very involved in their work. And what we do when we are building this customer journey map is actually have the customer with us as well. So we are collaborating and we are understanding both sides. Okay, I think I'm just about out of time. Thank you very much for some of the questions that have come through. I will answer those in a written format. I will make some of the slides available, but please remember my call to action. If you have 10 or more managers and you would like a little bit more detail about your industry, how this could work for you, then just respond to the call to action email, which will follow up, and we can arrange that. So thank you very much, and have a great rest of the day wherever you are. Bye-bye.